Joined now by the former executive producer of Hockey Night in Canada, the co-host of the Bob McCowan podcast, the pride of Oliver, British Columbia, Mr. John Shannon. We're shouting Oliver today, John, because we want you to put your Canucks fan hat on. We're asking on our Tim Hortons poll question, should Canucks fans simply be happy with making the playoffs?
If you had asked me in December, the answer is yes. If you ask me on March the 19th, the answer is no way. Mm-hmm. They've got to go farther than the first round now, for sure. I mean, that's the year that they've had. That's the investment that this team has made in this roster. So I think expectations have changed in British Columbia when it comes to the Canucks, and I certainly think that the expectations have changed for the club itself. So that's an easy no way vote for me.
Would one round be enough?
Well, how about if we go one round and 6 games, Matty? Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know the answer to that. They have to view success as of getting out of the first round, in my opinion. They're going to meet a tough team in the first round, and they're going to meet a tougher team in the second. And if they get to the third, it's going to even be tougher than that. And so from that perspective, I think you can probably measure the success based on the competition. So if they are able to play a team that they win in 6 games in round one, and then face the Edmonton Oilers or the Vegas Golden Knights and take them or lose in 7, then I think it's a success. But it's hard to sit here and say without knowing who the competition is.
Well, Blake and I sometimes poke fun of our friends in the Alberta capital, because in 2017 they lost in round 2, I believe, in 6 games, and talked about how it was lost in 7 games, and talked about how it was a, quote, magical run.
There was a CBC promo that year
for a young Oilers team that was making its first foray into the Stanley Cup.
Relive the Oilers' magical run through the playoffs.
Should their inexperience be held against them, John, or should the inexperience count for something as they make their way into the Stanley Cup playoffs?
Well, I think we'd be silly not to think there won't be a learning curve for this group. When you consider what they've been through, what they haven't been through. I mean, are we going to point at the success in the bubble and say that was success and that they're going to learn from it? I almost want to take everything that happened in the bubble and throw it out, because it was such a different animal than what you regularly see in a Stanley Cup playoff series. There is going to be, I guarantee you, at some point in the postseason, some disappointment for Canuck fans. There will be, but the expectation should not wane based on the fact that, I mean, do I think they're going to win the Stanley Cup? No, I don't. I don't think they're going to win the Stanley Cup. Are they going to make a dent? Yeah, they're going to make a dent, and that's a real positive at this point.
It's a shame in this first year back into the playoffs, real playoffs in 10 years. This happens to be in the ebb and flow of performance. The Western Conference is riding a high right now. The Western Conference has the bulk of the talent, in my opinion. If they were winning the Metropolitan Division right now, you'd certainly like their chances of making it to the conference finals. You're probably less likely to face a juggernaut if you're winning the Metro this year.
I think you're right. We might get a measure of that, Blake, tonight. Winnipeg is in Madison Square Garden to play the Rangers. We might get a real sense of where the East versus West is when it comes to competition. There are times I've always believed that, the Eastern teams, whether there was only 3 or 4 of them that were high echelon teams, were actually better than anything in the West. But I don't think that's the case this year. I think the West is certainly deeper. You look at the 3 teams in the Central: Winnipeg, Dallas, and Colorado. You guys saw what Colorado does. Mm-hmm. We had a good example of that last week in both Vancouver and in Edmonton. So from that perspective, I think the strength of the West is in the Central, plus the Canucks and Oilers. Vegas is still.
They got to be
Vegas
there.
Is on the. Well, I tell you what.
They're not playing well, but they still got to be there. They got the pedigree, John. The question would be, if the Vegas Golden Knights went on a run through the playoffs and made the Stanley Cup final, would you be surprised? Come on, the answer is no.
I wouldn't be.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be. And a lot of it's going to come down to how good their goaltending is, because I love their defense. Jack Eichel's proved to be the real deal as one of their key forwards. But then it's going to, the onus on Aiden Hill and Logan Thompson to be the difference makers, and that's something that they haven't had a lot of this year.
It's true.
Winnipeg on the marquee at MSG. Gary's worst nightmare.
Oh, man.
It's happening here tonight.
Oh, come on now.
Damn well, Shannon, that was always the big fear. We really want to put Winnipeg on the marquee at MSG, and I have all these New Yorkers go by and snicker, go, who the hell is Winnipeg?
Yeah,
Where the hell is
Steve from Queens isn't walking by the marquee going, oh, Winnipeg's in town. Oh, maybe I'll buy today.
Hey, listen, we've always sold on our, every marketing department of your own team sells on not who's coming to town, but your team. Which leads to a question, not that I'm trying to take over this segment, which leads to the question of schedule. 20 years ago, people were lamenting the fact that Alex Ovechkin and Sidney Crosby were only coming to Western Canada once every 2 years. Do we need to see every team in every arena anymore? I think that there's going to be a ton of traction about rejigging the schedule to discuss whether they want more rivalries on a regional basis. I'd like to see Colorado guaranteed 2 games against the Canucks at Rogers Arena every year. Right now, they can't guarantee that the way the schedule's built, simply because you still have to go to the East and play them home and home. Right. So do you want to limit the amount of Eastern games and then put more onus on divisional and conference play? I think that's going to be a question that's going to come up.
Well, let me ask you this, Sean. And incidentally, let's take Connor Bedard twice per year, every year with the Blackhawks here, back in his hometown, right?
I rest my case, sure.
Let me ask you this, John. Is that a little bit of the difference between Canadian hockey fans and American hockey fans, in that the regional rivalries, Penguins, Flyers, Devils, Rangers, Islanders, Rangers, all that, those are more meaningful games to them, whereas we here in Canada absolutely want to see every team and every star, not even superstar, just every star in the building once per season?
I think a lot of what we did when I was at the league at that point was to make sure that every Canadian fan saw every key player. Yes, I do think that that's something. But I'll tell you what, you joke about it. I do know that there are teams in the Eastern Conference that are saying, why are we watching the Calgary Flames? We don't need the Calgary Flames in our building. We need the New Jersey Devils. We need the Carolina Hurricanes. I do think that conversation is going to occur, and it's not a knock at the Calgary Flames. At the same time, do we really need to see the New Jersey Devils in Calgary, Edmonton, and Vancouver? Do we? I don't know. Once every second year, maybe, but do we need to see them every year?
Somebody's going to get pissed off that McKinnon, McDavid, and Bedard
Here's family on line one for John. Yes, they need to see all their boys playing together.
The excuse I always heard, though, with the NHL was the superstars need to be shared, and that if they're not in everybody's building, that's a problem. But, of course, Americans have grown up with the NFL where they don't get to see Patrick Mahomes every year, right?
No, but they get to see him on television, and that's one thing that I think has really changed in both countries, is the accessibility of the 1,300 games that you get to watch on television if you want to. If you're really a serious hockey fan, you do buy the NHL package, and you do get to see all those games.
But you do get to see LeBron James in every building every year in the NBA, unless it's a load management game.
That's right.
But here's the deal. They have less games. You don't laugh. They have less games.
Yeah.
And that's this discussion did not really exist in a 32-team league.
Right.
This was something that's the fine line, is you could probably hedge it when you had only 30 teams when the decision was way back in 2005.
Then that brings me to 34, John, or 33. Well, what do you make of this Anson Carter Atlanta group? And would that be in concert with another expansion franchise?
Yeah, we're going to have two in Atlanta.
You're going to have what?
No, I'm just
two in Atlanta.
Yeah, by the way, there's more than one group in Atlanta, and just to give everyone their due is that there's a group that Anson's part of, and then there's another group by a local billionaire that already has architectural drawings for a new building in place and ready to do structural discussions and soil sampling at a place in the North County of the Atlanta area. So I think we got the message from Bill and Gary last week is that we really appreciate Anson's enthusiasm, but we're just not there yet. And I think we're still a ways away from expansion. We have to solve Arizona first. We have to solve Arizona first before we can do anything about expansion.
That's going to be Salt Lake City, right? Like teams going to move to Salt Lake City. Yeah. Okay.
I think so. Yeah.
Do you know if Mr. Fertitta in Houston, the owner of the Rockets in the building there, is still interested? At one point he was talked about. In fact, at one point, I think he came out and said something about it, but do you know whether Houston and the Rockets ownership there is viable?
Well, they're viable for sure, but they're interested. Yes. And one of the reasons they're interested is because what they don't want to is have a second building in Houston to compete with them for other things.
Right.
So you know it's the devil you know in so many ways for Tillman Fertitta and the people in Houston. So I do think there's interest in Houston by his group, and one of the key reasons is to make sure that there's not another competing arena in the marketplace. So if you look at Houston, you look at Atlanta, you look at I still think the best option for an eighth Canadian team is here in Toronto. And then where else are we going to go? I think Gary's in a pretty good situation right now. Let's figure out what goes on with Arizona first, and then we can figure out if and when expansion takes place. And I don't see expansion taking place before any of the collective bargaining agreement discussions are finished and a new CBA's in place and a new TV deal in the United States in place. So we're 4 years away.
Hey, do you think the PA's got any chance to get some of those expansion revenues in the new CBA? Do you think they'll make the case? They'll
make the case. I'm not sure they'll win that.
Yeah. Well,
then the question is what will Gary give up in order to keep that $1 billion for the other owners?
That's it. I mean, Gary has lorded international play in the Olympics over them as a bargaining chip. I think it would only be right if the PA does the same with expansion revenues, which right now the players do not share.
GM meetings, any big takeaways for you, John, whether it's overtime tweaks or LTIR? Do you think anything comes of these GM meetings?
No, this is a place setter. This is the discussions, the breakout groups, the big group. Do they want to expand video replay on puck over glass? I think it's a mistake for a more of a practical reason than anything else. But at the same time, I think what we'll do is that people will say we're going to discuss this and put this to the forefront. Nothing's going to change in overtime, guys. They're really happy with overtime. They don't want to tweak it. If you want to go take the puck outside the blue line and regroup, that's at your own risk. And it may not be exciting, but overall, I think overtime is pretty damn good. So,
John, how about time to review? People have said, why don't you just put a limit on time? Like the ref can be at that TV for 90 seconds. And if he doesn't see it in 90 seconds, he's got to move on. How about that?
Because maybe it's more difficult than you think. And do you want to get it right, or you just want to put a time limit on it? If you're going to, this is the downside. This is what I remember sitting in the meetings with the managers, with the board, and Gary warned them of this, that if we go down this track, it will be an issue at some time. The worst complaint, it's fascinating. Connor McDavid has a big voice in this league, and he claimed it was 15 minutes for that review in Chicago. It was just over 4. It felt like 15, but it was just over 4. Mm-hmm. So you have to put these kind of things in a practical sense more than anything else. If you want video review, this is what you're going to get. And if you don't have video review, you're going to bitch and complain that was offside and your team got cheated.
Well, so why is it tough? You say it's more difficult than you think. In what sense? It's the digital age. My God, we can do anything in split seconds here. What's the holdup?
Camera angles, speed. There are still discussion points. I mean, they cannot zoom in that close without pixelating things. There are still some issues that way. It's not a perfect science. It still is not a perfect science. So is it close? Sure, it's close, but it's not a perfect science. And do you want to wait the extra 2 minutes or 2.5 minutes to be right, or just say, okay, you've got a time limit? Because what's going to happen is, and all it needs to do is to happen to the Vancouver Canucks once for the Vancouver Canuck fans to be in an uproar. And nobody wants Canuck fans in an uproar. They are not fun when they're like that.
We take no responsibility for them.
Almost nobody.
I would say on that if you can't, like, if it's not abundantly obvious in the first couple of go-arounds, whether you zoom in or not, if even from the original TV angle, if you still can't tell then, I don't care if it's right or not. That's the reasonable expectation. It's like even in court, no one's saying definitively. It's just beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's all we're looking for here. Is that if you can't see it immediately, it's probably not worth talking about, because we're not.
By the way, Blake, it isn't your money. When that offside decides a series, and the Canucks lose out in $5 million gates for 4 more gates at home, that's $20 million for the Canucks. That's when it means something, and that's what you have to keep that in mind.
You're absolutely right. I care not for a single penny of that man's money.
You think he'll miss any meals in that event?
Who, Blake?
No, Francesco.
I always worry about rich
billionaires'
guys.
money.
Yeah, that's right.
Hey, speaking of rich guy, Elias Pettersson, you worried about him right now?
No. In many ways, this is the dog days of the season. The Canucks are in the playoffs. Everybody's taken. They've got a target on their back. He's the latest target because he's the richest target. It will work out. Life will be fine. He's still a great player. He hasn't changed anything. It'll just, and by the time the playoffs come, Pettersson will be a factor.
Alvin said he doesn't suspect any of his UFA work will get done before the end of the season, unless somebody is willing to take a team-friendly deal. We know Tyler Myers is very well established here in British Columbia with his family. We know there are specific family needs here in British Columbia for his son. We're wondering, would it be wise if the Canucks tried to jump the market, get ahead of the market on a right shot defenseman, and see if he's willing to sign a club-friendly deal? What says you?
Well, you could always do that, and let's face it, that's exactly what they've done with Philip Hronek too. They threw out a dollar figure to him, and by the way, it got rejected rather quickly. You have nothing to lose by throwing a number out. But the challenge of that becomes, if you throw a number out, are you negotiating? And do you want to be negotiating at this time of year? That becomes the real question. So there's two sides to that story that I think that you have to watch for.
Mr. Shannon, we thank you for this. You've edified us, and we will look for this new rejig schedule, which honestly, when Sydney and Ovi are retired and gone,
right,
Blake, I'm not sure I need to see every Eastern Conference team here.
It's a lot of pressure on Jack Hughes to carry the Eastern Conference.
I mean, as good a player like Sam Reinhart, Jack Hughes, you've got some terrific Austin Matthews, you got some terrific players in the Eastern Conference, but I'm not sure you have
I don't need to see them. No.
Yeah, I'm not sure you have a transcendent one that I would need to see.
I know there are presidents of clubs in the East saying, "Why do we need to see all the teams in the West all the time?"
Yep. And I can understand that as well, because you get a litany of Canadian teams in some of those U.S. markets.
You face one division per year.
That's great stuff. Yep. John, thanks for this. Until next week.
Cheers, boys.
Hey, everybody. If you're enjoying what you're seeing here, then follow along with Sekeres and Price on YouTube. I promise more content coming.
The kids call it subscribe on YouTube.
Well, how about liking it?
Do that as well. Smash it right now.